Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Cradle News Roundup, your one-stop shop for all news West Asia. My name is Esteban Carrillo. I am head of news for the Cradle, and as usual, I'm joined by my colleagues, content creator and writer for the Cradle, Karim Shami, and columnist and editor for the Cradle, Sharmin Narwani. And before we start, first of all, we want to thank you for liking, for sharing, for subscribing, for helping this channel grow. And we want to direct you to our Patreon page where you can become a supporter for the Cradle, especially at a time in which the entirety of the region is facing difficulties. Here at the Cradle, we have had people displaced from their homes due to the US-Israeli war. We have had people had to leave the country. And we are still pushing through. We are pushing forward, but if we need your help. We need your support. So please share this video, share our content, and check out our Patreon where you can become a supporter. Without further ado, let's get on with the program. So today we need to start really with the arrest warrants that were issued last week against Israeli leaders by the International Criminal Court, months in the making, under threats of sanctions, under threats of repercussion. The ICC prosecutors, they finally issued these arrest warrants for war crimes committed in Gaza against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and Hamas military leader Qassam Brigade's commander Mohammed Deif, who, in an interesting twist, was allegedly killed by Israel earlier this year. Hamas never confirmed it. It seems the ICC doesn't really trust Tel Aviv's word too much on this, so they issued this arrest warrant. Deif, one of the masterminds of the Al-Aqsa Flood operation, but the Israeli leaders, in particular Benjamin Netanyahu, sitting prime minister, close U.S. ally to the United States. I think close is really putting it mildly. Is wanted. He's a wanted man today as we are discussing this. And you saw, I think, the size, right, of this landmark decision, the weight of it in the responses from the Washington's Western allies, NATO allies in particular. Washington, obviously, bristled at the decision, canceled the State Department briefing the day it was issued and condemned it, said the ICC has no jurisdiction, blah, blah, blah. You had Lindsey Graham making reference to the Hague Invasion Act, telling the prosecutors, we'll come in and invade your country if you dare do anything, etc. A usual bluster from the US. Its allies, from the UK to Canada to France to even Germany through gritted teeth, they all spoke about respecting the ICC's independence and international law, etc. Although most of them also kind of left it really up in the air, except Germany, which said we will not arrest Netanyahu. But everyone else was kind of like, we are not going to say whether we will arrest him or not, or Gallant for that matter. So, it's been a few days now since the ruling. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, guys.
I don't think he will be arrested, but of course it exerts a very high pressure on not only Netanyahu, but only on Israelis, because currently, according to international law, their leadership, they were condemned as war criminals. And it's like, for you having a country with a leader who is convicted with as a war criminal is pretty serious.
It's huge.
Yeah. And of course, this will create tension in the West. It's not only about Israel, because, for instance, if the UK and, for instance, Macron's France said that they will arrest him, and now you're seeing that Hungary did the opposite, and they asked him to visit, this will create tensions within the European Union. And of course, we saw how furious the cabinet of Trump, which is not active, they need around 1 month to be active. We saw how they were furious regarding this. And even Lindsey Graham said that they are ready to sanction the EU or even the UK or France if they not prosecute or catch Netanyahu, but if they didn't even condemn what's happening. So I think it will have waves across the world, not only in Israel. And of course, there's a big difference between, for instance, Putin and Netanyahu, because currently they are the two active leaders that were held accountable for the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza. But of course, Russia is a very big state, and they don't need the West. It's completely the opposite. But Israel can't survive, I think, like 24 hours in the current war without the West. And of course, all their military and their economy is based on the West. So I think this will have like a big effect on Israel.
I also think, it's really seriously big enough. And this is the first so-called Western leader who has been, issued an arrest warrant by the ICC. It's a game changer, and it breaks through a wall, a perception wall, that these people cannot be arrested and tried in international courts for war crimes. And this is the Hague, what's it called? The Hague what Act that the Americans passed?
They know it. It's called the Hague Invasion Act. Like the actual name is like the American something, like so.
Yeah, I just learned about it over this issue, but isn't that crazy? Basically, if the international court tries to hold Americans accountable for war crimes, the Americans have the right, even though it's domestic law, the Americans have the right under the act to invade and launch an aggression against the Hague, which is
it's called the American Service Members Protection Act. Was passed in 2002, of course.
After their illegal invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, they wanted to protect against it. So, which is why I think going after the Prime Minister of Israel, okay, and the Defense Minister of Israel, of course, he's not the sitting Defense Minister, but creates a whole new perception. Like I said, it breaks through an impenetrable wall that existed in international relations, in international lawfare in the past. And I think it's a game changer perception-wise. Now, one of the things that is likely to happen, because the ICC cannot try anyone in absentia. Obviously, Netanyahu and Gallant are not going to lawyer up and go over to The Hague anytime soon. But it's very likely that the ICC rulings or issuing of warrants will expand to other Israeli leaders and military ones, especially the army chief of staff, for instance, the new defense minister, potentially the cabinet, Netanyahu's cabinet. Now that you have the country's top politicians, being requested at the docket, right? You're going to have, I think, a lot more people emboldened to press forward with lawsuits. We know that there are a number of lawsuits in the making against Israeli soldiers. So anyone who served in this war where crimes have been committed, where the leadership has ordered war crimes, to be unable to travel, for instance. And I think it opens the gates for a flood of these kind of lawsuits. We've talked about this before on the show, but I think each one of these measures we're seeing by the highest courts in the world, the ICJ or the ICC, opens the door for, much more meaningful lawsuits, And then, of course, it's how Europe is reacting to this. They're all pretending that they abide by international law, right? These are the rules-based order guys, right? But, because, of course, they've charged Putin with similar things, and, they were all for that. They can't show these double standards so quickly. Had they had more time to prepare, perhaps they would have done, come up with different answers. But also it's isolating those countries, Hungary, Argentina, the United States, that are refusing to arrest Netanyahu or Gallant, and who are even inviting them to come visit their countries. Do you know, like, that world which dominated the hegemon, right, the powers that be, has suddenly shrunk to just the US and, Hungary and Argentina on this. Even
proxy, right? It's proxy.
yeah. So, I think, the UK is going to be very interesting to watch. The Israelis might test those waters in some ways, but I think there are a lot of very, very strong human rights law firms there that are not going to let that kind of thing pass. I'm kind of hoping, we'll see some movement. Keir Starmer, who's Prime Minister of the United Kingdom right now, I think actually wrote the law, helped change the law when Zippy Livni traveled to the UK. Do you remember there was an arrest? People tried to have her arrested over their one of Israel's massive aggressions on the Gaza Strip. And the argument was she's not a sitting official. That would protect her. If she was a sitting official, you could do it. And so they changed the law in the UK to protect non-sitting officials. And I believe it was Keir Starmer who helped draft that. So it's very interesting. It puts him in quite a position. And one of the things, just to point out to our viewers, our additional for Patreon subscribers only section today is going to be about how it's becoming, Israelis are starting to perceive that it's unsafe for them to travel. And that's happening in a lot of little ways, which we're going to discuss in the extra section. But this has just made it all the more, uncomfortable for Israelis who already have that perception, have had so for the last year.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something when I talked about Lindsey Graham. Also at the end of his interview, he said, if we don't stop this, we will be next. I don't know if he meant it or he thought about it, but this means that they know that they are criminals, the leaders of the United States. And he said, if we let the international community prosecute Netanyahu, then we'll be next, because they know it's either Israel or the United States that are accountable of more than 90% of the wars and conflicts in the world since World War II.
But also don't forget that there were times in the past when the ICC and I think maybe even the ICJ were looking at allegations of U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan. So the Americans went absolutely crazy, threatened the prosecutors, the judges, threatened all kinds of actions, punitive actions on the court and its members. And then the case was dropped. So the Americans have been well aware in executing their wars that this is a potential, and why it's been so important for them to control international institutions and threaten where necessary in order to stave off lawsuits that people would win.
Yeah, and the thing I want to go back to is what Karim was saying about they are so concerned because this means that they will also need to face accountability, right? This is, I guess, the knee-jerk reaction to threaten sanctions, to threaten, the ICC prosecutors, even their families were getting threatened, And it wasn't just like we're threatening the institution, we're threatening the Hague. It was like we're going down to the personal level. We're targeting families because Joe Biden and Anthony Blinken and Lloyd Austin and, Matthew Miller and whoever else, they're just as responsible in the end after such a long time, right? Like a whitewashing the genocide. We're seeing the situation in Gaza is just incrementally getting worse and not at all improving. The situation in Lebanon as well, which we're going to discuss in a couple of minutes, right?
One of the things also that's interesting to me is how are these European countries going to be able to justify selling weapons to a country when the ICC, the highest criminal court in the world, has ordered warrants for arrest of the Prime Minister and Defense Minister. So this might also spill over to the weapons sales argument that people are trying to bring in European countries against selling weapons to a country that's committing a genocide, right?
That's concern Israeli leaders, right? They met on Friday, the cabinet met, because that's really their main concern, because I think arrest is not that much. Their concern is arms embargoes. And, because the intensity that they have kept up both in Gaza and in Lebanon and in Syria as well, where they have been hitting almost on a daily basis, It's because of these supports, it's because of the shipments, the constant shipments, the jet fuel shipments, the repair parts, they help with the radar systems and the drones and etc. The moment you start cutting that back, then all of a sudden Israel is just unable to keep up this intensity that they feel is necessary to achieve their objectives.
And the argument just became easier. If you're not going to allow the prime minister and defense minister to step foot in your country, why are you still shipping arms to them? But the other thing that's interesting, I mean, pretty much every European country, with the exception of Hungary, has said we will arrest him, or have signaled at least that an arrest is likely. Yes, in the event that Netanyahu or Gallant step foot in their countries, where the Americans have said, we're going to crush you if you deny. They've threatened their European allies, if you deny them, we're going to do something to you. We're going to punish you,
We're going to
right?
destroy your economy. Is that what
kind
they
of
are, right?
that whole attitude of, remember freedom fries, right? That whole insane attitude that came out of the U.S. against their European allies. This is, by the way, a very interesting development because, okay, had the Europeans decided to go their own way and the Americans went their own way, fair enough. But the Americans now threatening European countries about this, okay? Which means more of a splintering of the Atlanticist Union, in ways that, I mean, the EU has said absolutely. Our EU member states are have the duty to follow the ICC.
Like, this is not up to interpretation.
Yeah. He said EU member states have a duty to arrest these guys, which means, again, more. And now this kind of splintering is happening on the eve of Trump taking office. And we know just how much he gives a shit about the Europeans. So all of this from a geopolitical perspective is very interesting, because the thing that's dominated the world order and shoved the rules-based order down our throat, ignored international law, let loose with heinous double standards, is this Atlanticist union. And if that starts to splinter...
One thing that our viewers need to keep an eye out for this week, Yoav Gallant is headed for Washington. The wanted war criminal who's, is needs to be arrested by at least 124 nations for signatories to the wrong statute. He's set to visit the United States Capitol on December 1st for talks with Biden administration officials. So, this is how much the White House cares.
It's very weird. Biden has only 1 month, and the guy was dismissed 1 month also before. I don't know what he's going to do, and Trump is coming. It's weird for me.
Well, Gallant was always the Pentagon's pawn, right? This is one of the reasons why Netanyahu wanted him out. So
I think it's interesting that Netanyahu's not making that trip, because, I feel his vulnerability right now. I do think Netanyahu is going to show up in either Hungary or Argentina or some such place to show, look, hey, I can do it. But that shows his weakness. That actually shows his vulnerability more than what he expects it to show, which is, hey, look, I can pop up in other countries. I don't think, I suspect the Americans are probably saying to him, don't pop up here. You're just putting too much pressure on our plate. Whereas Gallant is an ex-official, and he may be an easier one to work with, But of course, the Americans are going to try to buoy these two guys and break the perception that these two can travel. But again, like I said, there's a handful of countries that have said they will accept these guys. It's not a big deal if they pop up somewhere, the big deal is, can these guys ever travel to Europe? And the longer their inability to travel goes on, the more likely that inability to travel is going to spill over down the rank and file, even to the common soldier in the Israeli occupation army.
This is still a long way to go, because, and I will just bring back the Al Jazeera investigation from a couple of months ago, which they grabbed all of the social media videos that Israeli soldiers have been posting in Gaza. They're wearing the women clothes, the kill. I mean, no need to go over everything, but as many are saying, this is just getting started, right? As far as the legal, this is at this point a fight between whether international law is something that we are all must adhere to, or it's just meaningless words on a piece of paper that
But
nobody.
I even think this is going to spill over into the economic and financial sector. I mean, just the fact that the ICC has seen fit, or seen enough evidence to call for the arrest, to issue an arrest warrant for the two top people in the Israeli state, will make companies like BP, and Intel and others who have started. I mean, Intel, of course, showed months ago that it was shying away from investment in Israel. But, the Fortune 500, the Fortune 100, the Fortune 50 companies are going to think it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it right now. And I mean, it's a massive, massive blow to the Israelis, psychologically, for sure, and perception-wise as well. It's normalized the idea that they're war criminals. It's brought it into the mainstream. Western journalists who shy away from the stuff can no longer ignore it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
No, but
also it opens the doors. Yani. For instance, I think many Arabs wanted to do this previously, maybe people from Palestine or other countries, but they didn't because they know they will not get any result of this. But after this, people will be encouraged even to open all files against Israel.
Yeah, for sure, especially given what they're doing beyond Gaza at this point, and actually that brings us to what's been happening in Lebanon. The escalation in Lebanon has been massive. There is no other way to describe it. What's been happening, the retaliation from Hezbollah as well. We can get into that. On Sunday, Israeli media was reporting as many as 340 projectiles launched from Lebanon to Israel. So it's getting heavier, right? The fighting. But in Lebanon, a few days ago, Israel drops at least 4 bunker buster bombs in a crowded neighborhood of central Beirut, the Basta neighborhood. Kills. The final death toll I saw may have been around 15. I'm not sure if it has been updated yet. I know
Over 20.
over 20. Because the destruction was significant, right? We're talking again bunker busters. Bunker busters were the ones they used when they killed the former Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. In that attack, they launched anywhere between 80 to 100 in the southern suburbs of Beirut. But this attack on Basta, without warning, in the middle of the night, I think it was around 4 a.m., heard throughout the city, not just heard, felt, right? Many said the ground shook during this attack. This is just probably the most, the heaviest attack of the past several days, but that doesn't mean that it's the only attack of the past several days. They've been hitting Tyre, they've been hitting Nabatea, they've been hitting Baalbek, massacres in Baalbek, dozens of people killed. All of this as, again, ceasefire talks. Again, we're very close to a ceasefire. Again, as we are recording these, Israeli headlines are all saying, Netanyahu government accepts Lebanon ceasefire in principle, whatever that means. The Lebanese foreign minister just this morning says, every time we're getting closer to a ceasefire, Israel escalates. Again, what we're seeing with the bombs. And something very interesting, actually, that I just want to finish up here my thoughts with. He says the only way to pressure Netanyahu is on the battlefield, right? At this point, Lebanon's last recourse is the battlefield to achieve any of its gains. And I think this is something that has been repeating itself throughout, the modern Lebanese history, that any achievement that the nation gets, it's because they have this level of deterrence. As I was saying, Hezbollah has also significantly stepped up its attacks against Israel. So, Karim, why don't you tell us a bit more about what happened in Beirut over the past several days?
No, especially the last 24 hours. Let's get into that.
Yeah, unfortunately, what happened on Basta, in the Beirut neighborhood Basta, it was also next to my house. But first, I just want to clarify, this is the biggest attack in the history of Beirut. Beirut was never hit in such a way. هلا سمعنا يصاب bunker buster, but maybe many of our viewers don't know what are bunker busters. First, bunker buster, you can't use it without the acceptance of the United States. First, we have to talk about the hidden things. First,
They're American weapons. They're American-made weapons, yeah.
especially this one, because bunker buster is a very deadly weapon. And of course, the Israeli army asked the American army, and they accepted this. So bunker buster is a bomb that has sometimes a head of depleted uranium or other hardened material. The material is very hard. So when it elevates a building, the concrete is nothing for this because the material is very hard. So it's a bomb that penetrates usually 6 meters into concrete. Then after 2-3 seconds, it explodes. So they launched 4 on a residential building. It's a pure residential building. And I know personally the building. I can guarantee there's nothing there. And even if there was a Hezbollah leader, nobody has the right to kill 30 or 50 or 60 people. So you have to say, oh, there's a guy there. And
in the morning, like people are sleeping.
The assassination failed. I don't care if it failed or not, but they used the most deadly weapon on a residential building, and they used 4. So just imagine that it's a regular building. There's a bunker buster 6 meters. It exploded. Then another one that went into the ground. It exploded. Then the third one. Then the fourth one. So the health ministry, they said till now there's around 30 people dead. And of course, they are still searching because there are many people who are missing. So it
Now,
happened.
these were the weapons that were used on Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah. And then they use it on a residential building smack in the middle of Beirut, not in the suburb of Dahiyeh or anything like that. Bunker busters, as opposed to just...
It's a very old street. يعني
Yeah.
the buildings are very old, that the buildings, they don't have even parking. You know, it's all buildings that you have like 8-story or 10-story buildings. Usually, because the area is so old, usually we don't care about parkings when they build them. You park anywhere. So it's these kind of buildings. And of course, 2 adjacent buildings fell down due to this attack. And of course, shook, and many people were very afraid because in Dahiyeh, they are issuing warnings. And Dahiyeh is empty, but this was sudden, and it was in the heart of Beirut. It's not like, near Dahiyeh. No, it's in the middle of Beirut. It's the area that they targeted it. They targeted it deliberately, so every single Lebanese who lives in Beirut can hear it and be afraid. And because of that, Hezbollah retaliated in the past 24 hours, and they launched their biggest attack. And this time they were very clear. Usually we wait on the TV to understand what's happening, but this is the first time Hezbollah was very clear and released a statement with a picture and said, if you hit Beirut, you will hit Tel Aviv, because maybe the Israelis will not understand.
This is what thing Eric Kasman said in his last speech, right? This is Naim Qasem's words in his last speech.
Yes. And today, the military wing of Hezbollah, yesterday, they released this photo, and they were very clear, and they targeted Tel Aviv 4 times. And yesterday, the Israeli army also gave an issue and said, nobody can pressure us and wait for the following day or following hours. They said, just wait, and you would see why. And we're waiting. So I'll be honest, it's a psychological warfare, but literally everybody is in fear here, because maybe in any other war or whatever happens, you feel you can do something. You know what I mean? If you hear something, you can run, you can hide in your bathroom, and the earthquake happens, you know what to do. But these bombs, they shatter you. They shatter buildings next to your building. You will evaporate. So this
Exactly. Actually, that's exactly what I wanted to just interject very quickly, because you're saying they found about 30 bodies so far, right? And I remember when they hit this complex where Hassan Nasrallah was, underneath, and they leveled almost an entire city block. And to this day, we haven't heard of actual figures of death toll from that attack. And I think that what also, again, our viewers need to understand is that the impact, the ferocity of these bombs, they essentially tear people to shreds, right? And this is what's been happening in Gaza. This is why in Gaza you see the death toll kind of not go up as much as it used to a few months ago. And it's because you are seeing more often the use of weapons, white phosphorus munition, bunker busters, or just, when you hear about the bulldozers that were running over people dead and alive. This is meant to destroy the bodies, destroy the evidence. So what they're doing in Lebanon, again, the same script as Gaza.
Again, to me, Boston, for anyone who doesn't live there, a lot of us know Basta for where you go hunting for antiques. No, who go hunting for antiques. It's literally a catacomb of old shops, filled with furniture, that you buy to reupholster. If you want to find Art Deco stuff, if you want to find French provincial stuff, if you want to find, that's the kind of place Basta is. That's what it's known for. So imagine using bunker buster bombs on something like that. I kind of now understand why Hezbollah, the resistance axis, has not retaliated super firmly, even though we had these equations before the war started. If you hit Beirut, we hit Tel Aviv. If you hit our airport, we'll hit yours. Those are very clear equations from the last war. This is what we're going to do in this war. So some people say, well, why isn't Hezbollah responding? Why? Because the enemy is such a ferocious beast right now, that they would drop bunker buster bombs on Antiquities Row in Beirut. Like, it just boggles the mind. They know what they're dealing with, which actually brings us back to what happened the last 24 hours, because Hezbollah let loose on major cities in Israel. And for the first time, it wasn't like, oh, it's in a field. They missed their targets. It fell in an open field. Nobody was hurt. I mean, the devastation we have seen across northern and central Israel just in the last 24 hours. Big explosions, like collapsing buildings, buildings with a chunk of them taken out, parts of buildings strewn all over the streets, cars burnt, right? I mean, dozens and dozens of cars burnt, injuries, etc. We've not seen this before. We've never seen this before. And I mean, all the Telegram channels of, people, Western ones or Arab ones that are critical of Israel are just exploding with joy. People are like cheering for Hezbollah. Tell us, Karim, what happened in the last 24 hours and what was hit as best we know.
So yesterday, Hezbollah launched 51 operations in retaliation of what Israel did in Beirut, in Basta. So they launched 51 operations. 34 of them were inside Israel, and 19 were inside Lebanon, where they are trying to invade Lebanon, southern Lebanon. And the range of the attacks inside Israel was 150 kilometers. This is the furthest till now. Hezbollah said from the shortest point from the Lebanese border to the operation that they conducted was 150 kilometers. It's the longest till now. And they also, on the south, they also retaliated. They said that they destroyed 6 tanks and armored vehicles. And of course, they targeted Tel Aviv 4 times. And we saw the missiles. They released a video of the missiles that they used. And in northern Israel, they used around 200 to 250 missiles. And of course, nobody expected that, because Netanyahu, around 10 days prior to what happened, said to the Israelis, and he was very happy while saying it, he said that we destroyed 80% of Hezbollah arsenal. And many Israelis are saying if Hezbollah was able to launch all these attacks in one day, then where's the 80% that they destroyed? There's a big pressure on Netanyahu, even from his allies.
They don't match up at all, huh?
Yeah, so what happened yesterday, to be honest, many people or many Lebanese who support Hezbollah expected or were waiting for this day since 2 months. But the day came yesterday, and as Sharmeen said, everybody was like telling Hezbollah, where's your power? And some people were afraid, maybe their missiles and rockets were damaged. But now we know why Hezbollah didn't retaliate as we expected, because he knows that he's fighting with an unmoral enemy, which is Israel, and he has to do these operations when it's necessary. But He showed us, he showed his fighters also and his supporters, and he showed Israel and particularly Netanyahu that Hezbollah is still capable of inflicting damages in Israel in a range of 150 kilometers. يعني Hezbollah targeted a military site northern of Gaza yesterday. And this,
You know,
I think,
And
yes.
how did Israel retaliate today? Because they did bombard the hell out of Dahia, the Beirut suburb today, and took down some 20 buildings. But you know, this is interesting because now it's like pre-ICC warrant and post-ICC warrant. My first thought when I heard they took down 20 residential buildings in Dahia was, I mean, obviously this is a suburb that has been evacuated by people. A lot of the displaced people elsewhere in Lebanon have come from Dahia, which is a heavily populated, mostly Shia area, but you have Sunni and Christian too. When they hit 20 buildings, which are residential, right, collective punishment is a war crime. That's just something else to add to their list now, you know, of legal infractions. Like, that's no longer like Israel beating its chest and going, haha. Post ICC, this is another, you know, item on the long list of crimes Israel's committing.
Yeah, so they've always done collective punishment, not only in Lebanon and in bombings, even in the West Bank. If there's somebody who's naturally against his occupier, across history, every nation that was occupied, there's people that are against the occupation. If you're in the West Bank and if you even, they saw a post on your channel or on whatever, and if you did an operation, even if you they didn't kill Israelis, if they felt that you were going to do an operation,
Yeah.
they will kill you and they will destroy your house and they will take out your.
No, Karim, I know about their collective punishment. The point is, post ICC warrant, suddenly you're going, why'd you do that? That's really stupid. That's a very obvious collective punishment, you know, act or action.
I know.
Add to the list.
I'm just saying to our listeners because these are very serious issues and nobody talks about them.
No.
So, you know, as we are seeing the escalation, right, and in particular, what you said, Karim, about like they had claimed they destroyed 80% of Hezbollah's capability, and now all of a sudden Hezbollah is just like non-stop raining down missiles.
And used a cruise missile for the first time just a few days ago.
The Israeli air defense, they still have no answer for Hezbollah drones as well, right? They're still having a lot of trouble dealing with the drones. But all of this comes under the context, again, of ceasefire talks, right? Like Western media in particular, from the New York Times to Axios, etc., they keep talking about how we're so close, we're days away. Right now, as we are discussing this, Axios just cited a U.S. official as saying that the Israeli Security Cabinet is expected to approve a ceasefire agreement tomorrow on Tuesday. With Hezbollah moving heavy weapons north of the Litani, according to the agreement. And the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon includes the formation of a committee led by Washington to monitor implementation. Now, just a couple of minutes before this report comes out, apparently Channel 12 in Israel is saying that the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Lebanon would take place according to the seriousness of the Lebanese army's work. As long as Israel is not convinced that the Lebanese army is working well, it will not withdraw from southern Lebanon. So I think this is just example, like 99,000 over the past year of Israel, of Western media trying to tell us something, of the US trying to tell us, oh, the ceasefire is coming. And then Israeli media being like, you know, unless we don't like it, unless the Lebanese army is not serious, then we will continue.
Like I said last time, I can't see a ceasefire happening. I think Israel needs it much more than Hezbollah needs it. I mean, Hezbollah is getting a lot of flack internally, but Hezbollah can handle that, okay? And as long as its operations towards its southern neighbor are not interrupted by domestic issues, right? Which they won't be, because it's a very small minority that will be willing to take up arms against Hezbollah in Lebanon. But, you know, Israel talking about, or Americans talking about a ceasefire agreement using the Lebanese army to guarantee much of that ceasefire. Israel then starts to strike again Lebanese army posts. Just yesterday, was it? They killed a soldier, and I think, was it today? Like a dozen.
That's okay. And before we started, they also killed they targeted Lebanese army entire.
So, yes. So they're targeting Lebanese army. The Israelis, the Americans want to keep this pantomime of the ceasefire going as long as possible, hoping that one or the other side will give in these negotiations and agree to terms that can allow Biden to exit with a ceasefire deal. The Israelis absolutely do not want this. Netanyahu is under fire for many things. I mean, internationally, diplomatically, he is obviously caught in this ICC trap. But domestically, the amount of anger at Netanyahu after the Hezbollah's attacks of the last 24 hours, the amount of mockery of his obvious lie that, they took out 2 months ago 85% of Hezbollah's arsenal is putting a lot of pressure on Netanyahu. He is now going to do his utmost to hang on until Trump comes into office, okay? To just keep the wheels spinning until Trump comes, which will give him, in his view, at least 3-month respite from all the pressure he's getting from everywhere. Because Trump's going to give him potentially a blank check in the early part of his administration, and then Trump's going to be like, all right, enough already. You're making me look bad. That's my view, at least. So I think Netanyahu is just hanging on, because don't forget, if Netanyahu agrees to a ceasefire, even if it's on the best terms for Israel, which Hezbollah will not agree on, absolutely not agree on. Sovereignty is a number one consideration in negotiations for Hezbollah. So even if Hezbollah agrees to this, Smotrich and Ben Gvir will walk out of the cabinet, and Netanyahu's coalition will collapse, which means Netanyahu's government fails, and he's in a domestic docket, a courthouse, okay, facing crimes he's been investigated for a few years now. So for Netanyahu, the best solution is to hang on till Trump comes in, don't agree with the ceasefire, don't allow his coalition to fall apart, and hope that Donald will save his.
Yeah.
And not forget what happened yesterday. Many Hebrew media said that 4 million Israelis went to shelters, and some schools stopped today because Hezbollah targeted.
That's almost half of Israel's population went into shelters in a 24-hour period. Go ahead.
So this exerts a high pressure on Netanyahu. I think that's why many people on the news from Israeli news and the Americans, they are saying that we are close to a negotiation, because he wants to calm down the streets, because there is a lot of pressure on Netanyahu. And there's a big difference between the Israelis and the Lebanese. We saw the video that went viral of the grandpa where the bomb, I think, was maybe 100 meters to 50 meters away from him, and he didn't even shake. But we saw also that the Israelis, what happens when they hear the sirens, not even the sound of bombs, they are not prepared for this. And as Sharmeen said, what we saw yesterday was the first time we see such a thing ever. And Egypt didn't do that in their wars with Israel. Jordan didn't do that, and Hezbollah previously didn't do that. So what happened yesterday is very serious for the history of this entity.
These people, I love that grandpa, by the way. That is so typical. When we saw, Karim, you sent me the video right after it happened. When was it? 2 days ago, that building was just collapsed. And there's 50 Lebanese standing there taking videos of it. it's just being hit and collapsing, and it could, they could be next, because Israel likes the double taps too, right? It likes to hit civilians coming to aid others when they hit an area, and they're just standing there filming stuff. In every scenario, you don't see bombs, you don't see anything, incoming projectiles. Israelis, soldiers, okay, are flat on the floor, and you hear people crying or screaming in the background, just with sirens. So psychologically, the Israelis are not prepared for it. There's a lot of PTSD happening, not just with the soldiers, but in the communities, the settler communities. And, Israel said a few months ago that its bill at the end of the war for mental health services is going to top $50 billion, which is absurd. I mean, I don't know what that is for each and every Israeli, but also Hezbollah's reach outside just the northern settlements, okay, has been a game changer. These people have never seen this kind of war being waged in Israel, ever. It just, they can't even fathom. And look at what Hezbollah is hitting. So the 4 or so places hit yesterday. Petah Tikva, which is it's a city in the central district of Israel. It's east of Tel Aviv and part of the metropolitan Tel Aviv area. 5th largest city in Israel, and the 2nd largest industrial sector in Israel after Haifa. Okay, huge amount of high-tech companies and startups in Petah Tikva. The city hosts the Israeli HQ of Oracle, of IBM, of Intel, of Alcatel Lucent, of GlaxoSmithKline in pharmaceuticals. So really unexpected for them to be hit this way. Nahariya was another area. It's the northernmost coastal city in Israel. And because it's, pretty close to the Lebanese border, Nahariya's economy suffered a massive blow in the 2006 war. 2/3 of the city's population had to evacuate. That's then. That was a 33-day war, okay? And not nearly as deadly as this one, and certainly not as long. So
I think in the past 24 hours, Nahariya was targeted the amount of what it was targeted in the 33 days in 2006.
correct. So then 2/3 of the city had to evacuate, with the rest of them spending weeks in bomb shelters. Okay, this is a very heavily Jewish city. It's something like it's 98% Jewish, and the rest are like non-Jews but not Arabs, unlike Haifa, which is a mixed community of Arabs and Jews. It is home to some of Israel's biggest entrepreneurs. Haifa is the 3rd largest city in Israel after Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and it's a huge player in Israel's economy. It's home to one of the biggest high-tech parks in the country, and a center of heavy industry, petroleum refining, chemical processing. Of course, you have the big Haifa port, which is Israel's gateway to import-exports via seaways, via waterways, And as in 2006, Haifa was easily targeted by Hezbollah, and we expect a lot more escalation and potentially the shutting down of Haifa port if Israel continues to target Lebanon the way it has been, because Hezbollah will shut down that port. Tel Aviv, of course, again, we've seen Tel Aviv being hit a few times in this conflict, whether from Yemeni missiles or drones, and certainly Hezbollah ones, but, not sort of military targets, but in civilian areas, in residential areas, in like industrial parks and business, commercial centers. Now we're seeing buildings seriously hit, cars blown up, that kind of thing. It's the biggest city in Israel with a population of about 500,000 people, and is the economic and technological hub of the country, but it's also a global tech hub. It's where almost all the foreign embassies are based, and it has the third or fourth largest economy per capita in the region. It is also the most expensive city to live in the world. I suspect real estate prices are going to tank. The highest cost of living in the world city, Tel Aviv, is going to be facing a very, very different kind of future.
I just wanted to comment when you talked about the grandpa and the people that are filming the building. I just want to say that's not because they don't value their lives or because they are uneducated. It's unfortunately because they are used to this, because of Israel, because Israel is our neighbors. And Dahi, people maybe don't know, Dahi was created because of Israel, because Israel invaded the south in 1978. Dahi started, people started to go to Dahi and to build buildings in Dahi, and then they did in 1982, and they occupied the south for 18 years. And this actions from Israel led to the creation of Dahi, and that's why it's very populated. And most of the people that are in Dahi are people that were displaced in the 70s and 80s from the war, from not the war, from the Israeli invasion, to be precise. So this grandpa, I think he saw many wars. He experienced what happened in 1993 when they launched a bombing campaign, 1996. Also the invasion of Lebanon, the 70s. So he saw many things. That's why, that's what his reaction. Unlike the Israelis that came from many places. For instance, if you are an Israeli, that you came from Europe or the United States because they told you this is heaven, this is the safest place in the world.
Or because they were going to pay you and buy you a house.
Yeah, and because if you go there, we'll give you a loan for a car, and we can give you a land. Just choose a land. So now this dream is shattered, and that's why they are very afraid.
So before we wrap up for this week's episode, I do want to know what's been happening in the south. We should talk a bit about what's been happening in the battle, in the battles between Hezbollah and the invading army, because those also have been very, very intense over the past several days, in particular around the town or inside the town of Khiam in the south of Lebanon, where Israel is trying to take control, right? The Israeli army is trying to take control of this and strategically be able to, from there, push Hezbollah's forces behind the Litani, right? This is what they've been talking about for a year now at this point, that they want Hezbollah troops to be pushed beyond the Litani, and then Israel to have, operational control of the south, that they would be handed over to the Lebanese army, etc., etc. But it seems like Hezbollah is really, has really been denying any achievement to the Israeli army. Have they been able to take anything in the south? Because every day we hear, about attacks on Merkava tanks, drone attacks on gatherings of Israeli soldiers. And I think, what is this now? We're crossing in on 2 months since the ground invasions started. It almost feels like the Israeli army doesn't know where the attacks are coming from still, right? On the ground and even a longer distance. It's like they are fighting ghosts to this day, even 2 months in.
Yeah, and in 2006 also the Israelis, this term was created by the Israelis. They said that they were fighting ghosts. So there's two major battles in south of Lebanon. One is on the eastern side, and one is on the western side. On the western side, we have Shama. The Israelis were able to invade there up to like 5,500 meters. And there's where the historian Israeli was killed, who was like looking into the ancient temple or whatever. Although we go there, we don't know this. They were like trying to have evidence that Israel should expand until
Lebanon, the South Lebanon is actually Jewish, right? It belongs
to
Jews.
They were trying. He was trying to prove that this is their land. It's crazy for us. So let's go back to what's happening on the ground. To be honest, there's not much information coming from both sides, either from Hezbollah media or from Israelis. But there's ongoing clashes in Shama. And of course, the way that you go to Shama from South Lebanon, there's like there's like forests and many trees. Just for some viewers, we don't have dozens in Lebanon. It's
It's a Mediterranean country, guys.
yeah, so they are in Shamir, but till now they don't have an outpost or a building that they occupy that turned into like a barracks or a mini base. So currently the Israelis are still like going inside, fighting and going back, and of course over the firepower of their airstrikes. And there's not a lot of information, but Shamir is important because Shamir, if they take Shamir and they like station there, Shamir is very, very close to the Lebanese coastline on the Mediterranean, and there is like the highways there. It will be easier for them to go to Tyre or go south to Nakura, which is till now Nakura. They couldn't go to Nakura. Nakura just, I think, before we started, they bombed it via air. That means that there's no Israelis inside. The Israelis is still inside. And Nakura is very important because it's the closest town to the borders with Israel on the coast. And if you go to the other side, which is the eastern side, we have the town of Khiam. Khiam is not a village. Khiam is somehow a town, is one of the biggest towns in the south, near the border. In the south, we have Nabati, we have Tyre, we have other places, but near the border, Khiam and Bint Jbeil, they are the largest. And Khiam has, and is very important, not also militarily, morally, politically, because Khiam is very famous in Lebanon because there's something there was called in Arabic Mu'taq al-Khiam. It was a place occupied, a big building occupied by the Israelis, and usually any Lebanese that tried to resist the Israelis, not only through weapons, but resist even if he wants to write against Israelis. And in the 80s, 90s, and till 2000, Israel used to take them there and torture them there. And there's a lot of footages, and not footage, there's like documentaries, but there's photos from Khiam, and Khiam is very, very famous. Thousands of Lebanese people were tortured in Khiam. So it has a symbol for the Israelis, and many Israelis were stationed there. And when they left Lebanon, they left from Khiam to Bawabit Fatmi, which is Fatmi Gate, back to Israel. And of course, we have the southern Lebanese army, which was a Lebanese army, unfortunately created by Israel. Their stronghold also was Khiam. So if they take Khiam, it's like they can turn it into a moral and a political victory. But till now, clashes are inside Khiam, and the Hezbollah media, they are saying they didn't enter, but the Israelis said that they entered. But yesterday at night, there was a huge explosion in Khiam, which was registered in Richter scale. Yani the surrounding areas felt it, but also heard it, the land shock. And the Israeli media, they said that they detonated part of the city or part of the town. But till now, the media in Lebanon and even opposition media in Lebanon, that people that don't even support Hezbollah, they are saying they are still hearing clashes and explosions inside the town.
When I was in my second trip to Lebanon ever in 2010, I went to visit the old Israeli military prison in Khiam, and I just remember, I mean, the most memorable thing were like these steel boxes in which they would put Lebanese prisoners inside. And so either the heat or they would bang on it continuously would kill them off or make them crazy. It was such like basic torture things, it was just like set up as a torture camp. So heinous, but as a result, the residents of Khiam are very pro-resistance. The Lebanese resistance liberated them, after this terrible, terrible enduring ordeal. I actually had a friend who has a family house in Khiam call me up, in tears today because she has knowledge that Israeli vehicles are parked outside her family home and are likely to be squatting there. It's on the outskirts of town. And she She said, I can't ever go back to that house. They've completely contaminated it. She called Hezbollah and said, please blow up my house. Please blow it up. And I'm like, this is the kind of mentality that you'll find in Khiam. They're ready to take on any sacrifice because they've lived under 18 years or more of Israeli occupation, and torture and dehumanization. So it is a big deal. Unfortunately, around Khiam, you have Marjayoun, right, Karim? And Marjayoun. So there is a mostly Christian village, and as you have in the south, you have quite a few Christian villages there. Some that are both Christian and Shia, others that are mostly Christian. And just like with any sect in Lebanon, your politics aren't because of your sect, but most sects are split, right, in the two political spheres. So you have very pro-resistance Christians in southern Lebanon, and unfortunately in Marjayoun, which will be important, for Khiam's defense, you have Jaja Christians, who I heard have shot at Hezbollah fighters. I mean, this is like the old collaborators of the Israeli occupation in the past, the SLA, the Southern Lebanese Army, right, who then fled with the Israelis across the border in 2000 and live in tents in Ramat Gan because the Israelis don't value these useless Lebanese now. But to think that Jaja people, Lebanese forces people, have shot at Hezbollah fighters is a real shocker to me. So Khiam is being heavily contested, a lot of zero distance combat, as well as, a lot of bombing, that kind of thing. But, in my view, no matter what they do to Khiam, all Khiam residents, my dentist in Beirut is from Khiam. He said way early on in this war, they destroyed my house. I don't want to say how much money he spent on his mansion, okay? But they destroyed it, and he was like, people from Khiam are ready for everything to go, which means at any point, if Israel takes over the town, this town has a big target X on it for Hezbollah mortars, rockets, and you name it. Okay, they could destroy the whole town and no one in Khiam will be upset about it, as long as the Israeli occupiers are killed in the process.
So, to that point, actually, I'm just seeing this now. Journalist Ali Mortada just reported that in 70 days, Hezbollah has destroyed 60 Merkava tanks already. In 70 days, 60 Merkava tanks. So, yeah, it's not going the way the Israelis want.
It's less than 70 days.
And with that, I think we've reached the end of this week's episode. Thank you all so much for joining. Make sure to like, to share, to subscribe, and to check out our Patreon, where you will find some extra content, including a discussion on the way Israelis are being unwelcomed around the world in different aspects due to the genocide in Gaza, of course. So make sure to check that out. And for the Cradle News Roundup, we want to thank you. My name is Esteban Carrillo. I have been joined by Karim Shami and Sharmeen Narwani.